She stood tied to a weather-worn fence post behind the saloon, arms above her head like some rusted-out scarecrow. Barefoot. Mud up to her ankles. A ragged muslin dress clung to her like wet paper, and her wrists were blistered from the coarse rope cutting in with each flinch. She was 12. Maybe younger. Thin as a fence rail and quieter than the wind. No one knew her name. No one asked. The crowd around her laughed, spat, gambled. Most weren't bidding on her. They were here for the card games inside, the girls upstairs, the whiskey. But when a child got tied up in plain view of the town's only saloon, some men got curious, some got angry, and the worst kind got interested. One such man leaned against a broken hitching post, chewing on jerky and squinting through the dust. "Gambler's kid," he muttered. "Owes every man in town. Using her to pay off what he can't cover at the table." He didn't sound surprised. No one did. Then the wind shifted, and through the trail dust came a rider. Tall in the saddle. Worn hat, frayed coat, and eyes that didn't blink too much. His name was Jesse James. 40 years old. A man with no sons, no daughters, and a ranch he couldn't keep together without breaking himself in half each morning. Jesse wasn't headed to town that day. He was just dropping off old tools for sharpening, maybe picking up a few supplies. But when he passed the alley and caught a glimpse of her, sunken cheeks, arms trembling from the weight of staying upright, his horse stopped before he even asked it to. He stayed there a moment, jaw tight, reins slack. Watching. Listening. A loud voice cut through the air. $12 for the girl. 1 week's labor or permanent, your pick. She's small but she don't eat much. The girl didn't lift her head. The gambler, thin, sour-smelling, and missing half a smile, sauntered toward the post and gave the rope a tug like she was livestock. She can clean, wash, cook a little. Stronger than she looks. And dumb as dirt, won't talk back. No one moved. The crowd shifted away, losing interest. Too ugly a scene even for this town. Then Jesse dismounted. He didn't look at the gambler. Didn't speak. Just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded cloth bundle. Inside, coins clinked. The gambler narrowed his eyes. 15. Jesse nodded once. You want her for the week? No. Permanent. Jesse paused. Then, I ain't buying her. Just settling your debt. The gambler chuckled. Same difference. He tossed the rope into the dirt like it was nothing. She's yours. Jesse didn't speak again. He walked over, knelt, and cut the girl loose with his pocket knife. Her arms fell too fast. She staggered and he caught her, not roughly but not tenderly either. She looked up at him, startled, then quickly away. No tears. Just wide, hollow eyes that had stopped asking for kindness a long time ago. They rode out of town under a sky going gray. She didn't sit behind him. He let her ride the mule alone, reins tied loosely to his horse. She clung to the saddle horn, fingers white-knuckled, and kept her face turned from the road. Dust lifted behind them like ghosts not yet done whispering. Jesse James's ranch sat 10 miles west, nestled between two rocky bluffs and framed by cottonwoods gone bare for winter. The barn was half collapsed from the last storm, the roof still leaking from the one before. Chickens wandered loose. A fence post lay crooked near the front gate. Jesse hadn't had time to fix it. The girl took it all in without a word. He led her into the main house. Small. Sparse. A pot of beans bubbled on the stove, the only warmth in the room. A wool blanket sat folded on the cot beside the fireplace. He pointed to it. Yours. She stood there, frozen. You hungry? She nodded once. He ladled out beans into a dented tin bowl. Set it on the table. She sat, didn't touch the spoon. Just stared at it like she didn't know what it was for. You don't gotta eat it fast, he said, quieter now. She picked up the spoon, careful not to spill. When she tasted it, something in her face flinched. Not from heat. From flavor. He realized then she didn't know what it meant to eat warm food sitting down. She didn't finish. Just said, thank you, in a voice that sounded like it came from under floorboards. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer stories. He just lit a lamp, checked the fire, and said, I don't lock doors. You're safe here. She nodded again but didn't move. He stepped outside to unhitch the mule. Night fell fast and the wind came sharp through the canyon. Coyotes cried somewhere past the ridge. Jesse looked up at the stars, wondering what the hell he just brought into his life. When he came back in, she was asleep, curled on the cot, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was still tied to something. At midnight, a floorboard creaked. Jesse sat up in his chair, hand instinctively on the rifle beside him. The girl was standing there, eyes glassy. Don't lock me in the barn, she whispered. He lowered the rifle. I won't. I've been locked before. I figured. Silence. She walked back to her cot. Curled up again. Didn't sleep the rest of the night. He didn't either. In the morning, frost glazed the window pane. The sun came up blood orange behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Jesse poured water into the kettle. His hand trembled just a little. He told himself it was the cold. Outside, a hawk circled. Inside, the girl was still on the cot, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Jesse James didn't know her story. Didn't need to. He'd seen enough men do worse with less reason. All he knew was that the first thing she asked of him wasn't food. Or a name. It was not to be locked away. And maybe that was enough. For now, she woke with the sun, though Jesse hadn't told her when to rise. No bell, no shout. Just the natural rhythm of a girl used to punishment if she didn't guess right. The quilt had slipped halfway off during the night, but she hadn't moved. She lay still, eyes open, breath quiet, like she wasn't sure if the warmth was real. Jesse was already outside, splitting kindling by the shed. His coat hung from one shoulder, and every strike of the axe echoed through the canyon like a warning to the cold. The girl stood at the threshold of the porch, unsure whether to ask permission or just step forward. She settled for neither. When he noticed her, he simply jerked his chin toward the coop. Chickens need feeding. Corn's in the sack. She went without a word, barefoot, her toes disappearing in the frostbitten grass. By the time he finished stacking wood, she'd returned, hands red from the cold, bits of straw clinging to her skirt. He half expected a complaint. She didn't offer one. Just took a seat on the steps, knees pulled to her chest, eyes on the road like she was watching for someone to come take her back. They didn't speak until breakfast. Jesse had a habit of baking once a week, though his bread came out hard as a roof tile most days. This time it was still warm, crust golden, the scent filling the tiny house like something sacred. He set a piece on her plate beside a spoonful of honey and watched, pretending he wasn't watching. She didn't move. You can eat it. She looked at him. All of it. He paused. Course. It's what it's there for. Her hands hovered over the bread like it might vanish if she touched it wrong. She tore a piece off, slowly held it to her lips, then stopped. Should I save some for later? He leaned back, letting his chair creak under his weight. There'll be more later. She stared at him, not quite deceiving. He didn't push. Just got up, poured himself coffee, and looked out the window as if the land might answer the ache he couldn't name. After breakfast, she swept the floor 3 times, though it didn't need it. She scrubbed the stove's black iron belly until it gleamed like a mirror. She folded her blanket twice more before dusk. Jesse tried to tell her she didn't have to, but every time he opened his mouth, her eyes darted wide, like she'd braced for a belt that never came. She don't know what to do with warm bread, he muttered to himself that night. Or silence. Over the next week they settled into a rhythm. Not comfort, just routine. She followed him when he checked the fence line, kept pace as best she could. When she stumbled over a loose stone and skinned her knee, she gritted her teeth and kept walking. He stopped, handed her a cloth and said, "Ain't ashamed to hurt." She only nodded, wiping blood in silence. On the 4th evening he caught her outside by the barn, curled beneath a wheelbarrow, not sleeping, just hiding. When he asked what she was doing, she whispered, "Just checking." For what? If the door locked from the outside. He crouched beside her, voice low. "It don't. Nothing here does." She didn't respond, but the next night she slept closer to the fire. A week passed. Then another. The neighbors started talking. "Who's the girl?" asked Hank Sutter, pausing at the well with his horse. Jesse answered with a glance. "None of your concern." Sutter raised an eyebrow. "Not saying it is. Just strange is all." "Strange don't mean wrong," Jesse said, then walked away. By the 3rd week she'd begun humming. Barely. Only when she thought he wasn't near. A little tune off-key but steady, like a bird just learning its voice. Jesse pretended not to notice. She didn't ask about his wife. The grave behind the barn had no marker, only a stone with weather-soft edges. One morning the girl left a flower there. A single Danjessian, crushed and dry from the season but placed gently. Later he asked, "You miss someone?" She didn't answer. But that night she whispered, "I had a brother." Had. She didn't say more. Spring was trying to claw its way in. The snow was gone from the ridge and birds had returned, their calls echoing through the cottonwoods. One morning she found a robin's egg cracked open in the grass. She picked it up and brought it inside, cradling the blue shell like it was glass. Jesse watched her from the porch and thought, she's been broken too. But she still holds things gentle. The first time she laughed was by accident. Jesse had burned the cornbread, black as coal. He muttered under his breath, "That loaf died in vain." She tried to keep a straight face, but the snort escaped before she could bury it. Then she froze, hand clapped to her mouth. Jesse didn't laugh back, but he smiled. "'Bout time," he said. "Thought maybe you'd forgot how." She ducked her head, still grinning behind her palm. They had only one visitor that month. A travel-dressing tinker who'd once played cards with Jesse in better days. He noticed the girl right off. "Hired help?" "No," Jesse said simply. The man grunted. "Not your kin either." Jesse turned to her. "Go on inside, would you?" She obeyed. When the man looked back, Jesse's voice was iron. "You don't ask about her again. She ain't my business." Exactly. That night, she sat at the table longer than usual. Finally, she asked, "Will you sell me back?" Jesse blinked. "What?" "Men buy girls, then sell them again. That's how it works." He set his coffee down. "That ain't what happened." She tilted her head. "Then what was it?" He searched for words. Took his time finding them. "I think I saw someone drowning. And maybe I was too. So I pulled you out. And you," he paused. "You pulled me too." She didn't answer. But she didn't ask again. On the 12th night, she handed him a folded paper. "What's this?" he asked. "My name." "You already told me." "Not the real one." He unfolded the paper. For letters, shaky and small but written like a promise. "Lena." Jesse didn't say anything for a long time. Just nodded. "All right then. Lena." She beamed like she'd just been given permission to exist. The next morning, Lena brought in kindling, poured coffee, and set 2 plates without being told. When Jesse sat down, he found a slice of warm bread on his plate. Not from him. From her. She watched him take the first bite. He chewed slowly, looked up, and raised an eyebrow. "Little dry." She grinned. "You didn't complain about mine." He laughed for the first time since his wife passed. Outside, the wind carried birdsong through the hills. Inside, the fire burned steady. And for the first time in years, Jesse James didn't eat breakfast alone. Not in his belly and not in his bones. The wind turned mean the morning they came. Jesse knew something was wrong before the dust even rose on the road. Birds went quiet. The air got that tight, waiting feel, like the land itself was holding breath. He was chopping wood when the dog growled low and steady, ears pinned flat. Jesse stood straight, wiped his palms on his trousers and looked east. 3 riders. Moving slow, decelerate. The kind of slow that meant they didn't need to hurry, because they expected everyone else to. Lena was inside washing beans. She hadn't seen them yet. Jesse didn't call her. The men dismounted before reaching the gate. The first wore a preacher's collar, stiff and clean despite the ride. His eyes held no kindness. The second was a lawman, badge crooked, mustache trimmed too neat. And the third, well, Jesse didn't need a name for him. The eyes were enough. Sharp, cold, and narrow. He had the gambler's smirk. Same jawline too. "Morning," Jesse said, voice even. The preacher stepped forward. "Mr. Boone?" "That's right. I'm Reverend Hatch. This here's Deputy Slater. And that man's Mr. Caleb Dawes." Jesse nodded once, slow. "What brings you?" Caleb Dawes spat in the dirt. "My brother sold you something he had no right to." Jesse didn't blink. "He sold me a lie. Girl was chained to a post behind the saloon. I gave him coin to cut her free." Deputy Slater cleared his throat. "That coin didn't absolve anything. Legally, she's property settled through wager. There's paperwork." "She ain't a mule," Jesse said. "She's a child." Reverend Hatch folded his hands like in prayer, but his words came sharp. "We're not here to argue philosophy. You're harboring stolen property under your roof. Unless you produce proof of guardianship, the child will be returned." Jesse felt something dark flicker behind his ribs. Not rage. Not yet. Just a cold certainty that these men had come with their minds made up. She's safer here than anywhere else. She eats, sleeps, ain't chained, ain't afraid. That don't make it legal, the deputy said. Lena had stepped onto the porch without a sound. Her hair was braided, sleeves rolled, apron smudged with flour. She looked small in the doorway, but she held herself like stone. Caleb's eyes landed on her and curled into a smile that made Jesse's stomach turn. "Lena," the preacher said smoothly, "come here now. We'll take you home. This man's done his part." She didn't move. "Girl," Caleb growled, "you belong to our family. You were promised." Jesse stepped between them. "She ain't going." Deputy Slater's hand twitched near his hip. You sure you want to make this official, Boone? You really want to be on the record as obstructing the law? Jessie glanced back at Lena. Her eyes weren't scared now. They were hard. Set. She didn't need saving anymore. You got 7 days, Jessie said. Come back with papers. Or don't come back at all. Reverend Hatch's jaw tightened. The Lord frowns upon stubbornness in the face of justice. Jessie didn't answer. The 3 men mounted up again. Dust swallowed them as fast as it brought them. But the tension didn't leave with their horses. Lena spoke first. They'll come back, won't they? Yes. Then we got 7 days. She turned and walked back inside like she just added it to the list between feeding the hens and sweeping the porch. That night, Jessie couldn't sleep. He sat in the rocker near the fire, watching the flames jump like nervous hearts. He thought of his wife, her gentleness, the quiet way she had healed things with tea and silence. Lena was nothing like her. And maybe that's what made this feel like something new. Not a replacement. A reckoning. Lena stayed up too. Reading from an old hymn book, mouthing the words but not singing them. At one point she whispered, "If they come back and take me, what'll you do?" He didn't look at her. Just said, "Depends how loud you scream." The week passed too fast. Jessie wired a letter to a lawyer in Junction Bluff, an old army friend who'd once owed him a favor. But law moved slow out here, slower than horses. He knew better than to hope for papers before the deadline. On the 4th day he taught Lena how to hold the rifle. Not to shoot nobody, he said, but to feel the weight. To know you're not helpless. She nodded and cradled it like a newborn calf. Not fearfully. Carefully. On the 5th they rebuilt part of the fence together. Her hands blistered. She didn't complain. On the 6th she asked to sleep outside. Just for one night. So I'll know what to do if I have to run again. Jessie laid out a blanket beside her, under the stars. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The 7th morning came pale and windless. The kind of calm that only showed up before something broke. A wagon creaked up the road just after sunrise. Not the law. Not the preacher. It was a woman. Skin darkened by sun. Eyes sunken, voice rough as gravel. She stepped down slow, leaning on a carved cane. When she saw Lena she dropped the cane. "Mama," Lena whispered, her voice barely more than breath. Jessie froze. The woman was no older than 30, but she looked 60 from grief. She fell to her knees before Lena and clutched her so tight the girl gasped. "I thought you was dead," the woman cried. "I told them I'd come back. I told them not to hurt you." "They sold me," Lena said softly. "I know," her mother choked. "I came back. But they told me you'd gone. They lied." Jessie stepped away, unsure where he belonged in this moment. But Lena turned to him. "This is my mama." He nodded. "I figured." Her mother stood on shaky legs. "I got a shack near Cotton Bend. Nothing much. But it's ours. I came to bring her home." Jessie studied her. Ragged dress. Thin shoes. Bruised arms. She looked like a ghost trying to remember how to live. Lena looked up at him. Waiting. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Lena walked to her mother. Took her hand. Then turned to Jessie. "Will you come with us?" He blinked. "Just for a little. Help us get the place safe." His throat felt tight. "That's your home." She stepped forward, closed her small hand around his weathered one. "It's yours too," she said. The wagon rolled out by noon. 3 souls. 1 second chance. And somewhere on the trail behind them, the preacher's words scattered in the dust and meant nothing. But the sound of a girl calling a man family, for the first time? That would echo across the plains forever. They traveled slow, not because the mule was tired, but because trust takes time and no one wanted to spook it. The road to Cotton Bend wound through scrubland where the trees grew gnarled and low, clinging to red dirt like they'd survived storms that tried to yank them clean out. Lena rode in the back of the wagon with a blanket around her shoulders and her mother asleep beside her, head tilted, mouth open from exhaustion. Jessie walked beside the mule, hand on the reins, boots dragging slightly in the dust. He hadn't meant to go this far, but when Lena asked, he couldn't say no. He never really could, not since that night she whispered, "Don't lock me in the barn." The shack appeared near sunset, a slant-roof structure leaning against a rock ridge, walls patched with tin and timber that had seen too many winters. Smoke from a tiny chimney curled upward, lazy and blue. A bent windmill creaked nearby, and the smell of pine sap hung thick in the air. "That it?" Jessie asked. Lena nodded. But her mother, Mara, stared ahead like she'd just remembered every bruise she ever took inside those walls. They reached the door. It groaned open with a shove. Inside it was better than Jessie expected. swept, dry with a small table and one cot. A few jars lined the shelf. He saw a child's drawing tacked to the wall with a rusty nail, a woman, a girl, and what looked like a red house. The red had bled out with time, like a memory stretched too thin. She kept this? Lena whispered. Her mother smiled weakly. It was the only thing I could carry for a while. Jesse helped start the fire. Gathered dry wood, lit it with his flint, and fed it gently until it crackled. He didn't speak much. He knew when to give people silence, and this house was full of it. That night, Lena cooked beans and flatbread. Her mother dozed, waking only to murmur that the bread smelled like home. Jesse slept outside. In the morning the wind shifted again. He smelled smoke. Not cooking smoke. Wildfire. He bolted upright and saw the ridge to the west glowing faintly orange, like an ember flickering before it remembers its flame. He ran to the shack. Lena was already outside, barefoot, staring at the horizon. It's moving, she said. Jesse scanned the trees. Wind's pulling it east. If it jumps the canyon, it'll be on us before dusk. Mara stumbled out behind them, coughing. What do? We run, Jesse said. But Lena didn't move. She was staring at the tiny shed beside the shack. Mama's things are in there. My books. Her papers. Jesse glanced at the sky. Not worth your life. Lena looked at her mother. What if we don't get back? Mara's face crumpled. Jesse made the choice for them. I'll get it. You get the mule ready? Lena opened her mouth to protest, but he was already moving. The shed was padlocked with a bent nail. Jesse ripped it off with his knife and shoved the door open. Inside, a trunk, some old linens, a wrapped bundle of dried herbs. He grabbed what he could, stuffed them into his coat, and sprinted back as the first ash drifted down. By afternoon, the fire had crowned the ridge. Trees screamed as they burned. Smoke wrapped the valley like a closing fist. They rode out just in time. Behind them, the ridge burned red, angry, alive, consuming. Mara wept. Lena didn't. She watched it burn and said quietly, "It took everything again." Jesse looked at her. Not everything. They rode until they reached a creek where the water still ran clear and cold. They camped there, made coffee from the last of the grounds, and said little. That night, Lena sat beside Jesse, their backs against a rock still warm from the day. I thought if we came here maybe something would heal, she said. It did, he answered. She turned. How can you say that? The fire took it all. Fire burns what's dead, Jesse said. But it don't kill what's already living. Lena blinked slowly like she was taking that in word by word. I kept thinking this place would fix things, she whispered. That I'd see Mama in her home and something would feel right. But all I saw was what we lost. He nodded. That don't mean it ain't worth remembering, he said. But you don't gotta live in it. She didn't answer. But when he stood to walk back toward the fire, she followed without hesitation. In the morning they returned to the remains of the shack. The walls were blackened, one side caved in. But something caught Lena's eye near the stump out front. A book. Slightly scorched but intact. She picked it up, dusted it off. Inside was her drawing, untouched. She held it to her chest and smiled for the first time in days. Guess fire didn't win everything, she said. No, Jesse said. Not even close. As they packed the mule again, Mara leaned on Jesse's arm a little longer than needed. You didn't have to do all this, she said. No. But I'm glad I did. She studied him. You ever think about making something permanent again? He didn't answer right away. But Lena looked between them, quiet, hopeful, the way only someone who'd known loss could be. Jesse placed the book in the saddlebag. Let's get home first, he said. Then we'll see what still wants to grow. They turned toward the road. Behind them, the ridge still smoldered. But ahead? The wind smelled like rain. By the time they made it back to the ranch, the fence was gone. Jesse stared at the smoldering post. Charred wood still hissed beneath the ash like the ground itself was grieving. The wind carried a bitter scent of oil, scorched rope, and rage. This wasn't wildfire. It was human. Measured. Met. Lena stepped down from the mule, slow. Her mother clutched the saddle, trembling from the road, eyes wide with a dread she couldn't voice. But Lena, 12 years old, feet blistered, heart stitched from scraps, just stood there. Not afraid. Not surprised. Jesse walked the perimeter in silence. Boot prints everywhere. At least 3 men. He could tell by the depth of the prints that one of them limped. Caleb Dawes. They had waited. Watched. And when no one was home, they'd made their move. Inside the house, the furniture was overturned. Jesse's wife's rocking chair had been hacked apart with a hatchet. The rifle was gone. His ledger too. And scrawled on the door with charcoal was one word: thief. Mara covered her mouth. But Lena stepped forward, fingers grazing the black letters. They want us scared, she said. That's all this is. Jesse looked at her. Really looked. There was something in her now, something forged in the red glow of the ridge, something that wouldn't be broken again. The girl who once whispered "Don't lock me in the barn" was gone. What stood in her place was steel. We're not running again, she said. Jesse nodded. No, we're not. They started fixing things by first clearing the wreckage. Mara gathered the chairs upright and swept glass into a bucket. Lena untied what was left of the hay bundles and spread them to dry. Jesse rebuilt the front step by sunset. Each nail drove down with purpose. That night they slept in shifts. Jesse kept the shotgun across his lap. Mara leaned against the wall with a blade tucked in her sleeve. Lena didn't sleep. She just sat near the fire, watching the door like it might breathe. At dawn, someone knocked. Not heavy. Just steady. Jesse answered with the shotgun raised. On the porch stood Hank Sutter. He didn't flinch. Word's gotten round, Hank said. Some men think you took what wasn't yours. Some others think you saved her life. I know which I'd be, Jesse. Jesse lowered the gun. I brought nails, Hank added, holding up a sack. And planks. We're gonna need a few more hands if we're patching that fence. Behind him, 3 more neighbors waited. One held wire. Another had stew. Mara stepped forward, hesitant. Hank tipped his hat. Ma'am? Lena stayed on the porch, arms folded. Watching. Always watching. By noon, a dozen people were at work. Someone brought fresh water from the well. Someone else offered blankets. No one asked questions. They just built. Caleb Dawes rode in near sundown. He didn't come with a badge or preacher. Just himself, and the sour grin that had once made girls flinch. Looks like you got a party, he said, dismounting slow. Jesse didn't reach for the shotgun this time. He walked toward him, steady. Caleb spat. You think this changes anything? She's still marked. Property. You got no papers. She's not property, Jesse said. Caleb laughed. You gonna marry her mama? Make it legal that way? You really want a burned-out widow and a feral brat for your trouble? Lena stepped down from the porch. She didn't speak. She slapped Caleb across the face so hard the sound echoed through the hills. The men stopped working. No one spoke. Caleb's cheek burned red. You don't get to talk about my mother, Lena said, voice quiet but deadly clear. And I don't belong to you. Caleb sneered. Little wildcat thinks she's grown. Jesse stepped beside her. She's not wild. She's brave. That's more than I can say for a man who only shows up when the fire's out. Caleb's hand hovered near his belt. But too many men stood behind Jesse now. Too many eyes watching. He didn't draw. He mounted his horse. You'll regret this, he said. No, Jesse said. I won't. Caleb turned and rode off without looking back. When he was gone, Lena turned to Jesse, chest rising and falling fast. Her hand still shook. I was scared, she admitted. I know. But I didn't run. No, he said. You didn't. That night they ate together by the fire. The stew was warm. The bread soft. And when Mara sang, a lullaby from some long-ago memory, Lena rested her head on her shoulder without flinching. Jesse watched them. Something deep in his chest uncoiled. For the first time in years, he let himself lean back in the chair and close his eyes, just for a minute, without fearing what might come in the dark. Later, as the fire burned low, Lena looked up at him. Do you think I'm still broken? He didn't answer right away. He walked to the old cabinet, pulled out his wife's carving knife and handed it to her. It's not about being broken, he said. It's about what you do after. She took it gently, the blade gleaming in the fur jesset. And then she smiled. Not because she was fixed, but because she wasn't hiding anymore. In time, people forgot how she got there. They remembered her bread, her stories, her stubbornness. And when she rode into town years later with her own wagon, with her own name on the ledger, no one called her wild. They called her Boone. Because names are earned. And fire? Fire only changes everything if something new is waiting in the ash. This story, well, it ain't just about rescue. It's about what comes after. And if you're lucky like Jesse James was, the person you save might just save you back. The piano had long gone quiet in Finch's saloon, though its keys still bore the smudges of desperate hands and spilled whiskey. In the lamplight haze, the place smelled of old cigars and men who hadn't prayed in years. There was laughter, sure, but it was the kind that cut, not the kind that healed. Eli Shepherd stepped through the saloon doors not looking for women, nor whiskey, nor company. He'd come to settle a grain delivery, to nod his head, take his coin, and vanish back to the silence of his homestead. That was all. The evening had pressed down with the weight of ghosts, and he hadn't spoken a word since breakfast. But then he saw them. 3 figures lined up near the bar's back wall, half-lit like ghosts at judgment. The first was young, couldn't have been more than 19, wrapped in a yellowing wedding dress that had never fit her shoulders right. Her arms were burned, small blistered welts like she'd leaned over too many hot stoves. She stared at her own shoes like they'd speak before she ever would. Next to her stood a broad-shouldered woman with russet hair, arms folded like a soldier guarding her own hurt. The lace on her gown strained at the seams, and the men laughed when they saw her. But she did not laugh. She stared at the floorboards like she was memorizing every knot in the wood. And then, her. The last woman stood like she didn't belong there at all. She held her chin high, the left side of her face in shadow. But when she turned, Eli saw it. Her left eye was clouded white, like a full moon hidden behind storm glass. The rest of her was composed, proud even. A former schoolmarm maybe, judging by the straightness of her spine and the way she didn't look away from any man in the room. They were not speaking. They were not smiling. They were waiting. He knew this wasn't a dance and this wasn't marriage. This was shame being sold by the hour. Silas Finch, the saloon keeper, was wiping a mug with a dirty rag and calling out bids like he was selling cattle. "Who'll start us off for the blonde one? Bit shy, but she'll warm to kindness." Someone laughed. Another voice offered, half a jug of rye and a knight's favor. The crowd roared. Eli didn't move. His boots remained planted in the sawdust, but something in him went cold. A memory rose, his wife Anna before the wasting sickness. Before she bled out alone while the doctor took too long. She'd been rejected by 3 suitors before him. Told she was too skinny, too plain, too serious. He'd loved her for every one of those reasons. Now here were 3 women with those same labels stitched to their backs like crimes. The youngest flinched when a man reached toward her face, just to check the teeth, as he joked. Eli stepped forward then, silent as fog. He didn't look at the men. He looked only at Finch and said calm and low, "I'll take all 3. The laughter paused. Someone coughed. Finch blinked. "All 3? You drunk already, Eli?" Eli reached inside his coat and laid down a handful of coins. Clean silver. Hard-earned. The kind that didn't make noise when it hit the bar. It just sat there, solid like a promise. "They're not cattle, Silas," he said. "They'll come with me." One of the men, young, red-faced, angry at the silence, spat near Eli's boots. "What are you planning, shepherd? Build your own little church." Eli didn't answer. He just stepped to the side and opened the saloon door. The storm hadn't started, but the air outside was thick with the promise of rain. For a second no one moved. Then the proud one, the schoolmarm, stepped out first. She didn't look at Eli, only past him like a wind through dry grass. The broad-shouldered woman followed. And lastly, the girl in yellow, still clutching her burned arms, stumbled forward like she was waiting for someone to stop her. No one did. They vanished into the night, their dresses dragging behind them like old stories. Eli walked them to his wagon in silence. The horses stomped restlessly, unsure what was changing, only that something was. None of the women asked where they were going. He didn't offer. The ride was long and quiet. Lena, the girl, fell asleep against the sideboard. May sat upright, staring into the dark like it owed her something. Aunt June, the one with the clouded eye, kept her hands folded in her lap as if in prayer. The moon broke through once, pale and crooked. Eli glanced back at them. 3 women. All discarded. All stronger than they looked. And he didn't know if he was saving them or if they were saving him. The cabin appeared just before dawn, plain, wooden, with shutters loose and porch steps worn smooth. A lantern burned in the window, faint and flickering. Eli helped no one down. He only unlocked the door and stepped aside. "It ain't much," he said. "But it's clean." Inside there was a hearth, 2 cots, and 1 long rug that had once been his wife's. Dust clung to the beams. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was waiting. June took the cot closest to the window. May sat on the rug and stretched her back with a groan. Lena stood by the door, not sure whether she belonged inside or not. Eli fetched water and bread and left it on the table. He didn't say good night. Just took his hat off, nodded once and stepped outside. He sat on the porch, the cold wind brushing his jaw. Behind him a chair creaked. June had joined him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The horizon bled into soft gray. Morning was beginning. And with it, something else. He didn't know the word for it yet. But it felt like hope. The sun rose quietly that morning, slipping over the hills like it too was uncertain whether it belonged. Its light fell across the weathered front porch of Eli Shepherd's homestead, where 3 wedding dresses hung damp from the night fog, each one breathing steam into the chilled dawn. No one had spoken since they arrived. No introductions, no questions. Only the creak of floorboards and the sound of a fire coaxed to life before the sky had turned full gold. Lena was the first to move. She stepped barefoot into the kitchen, her nightgown clinging to her small frame, hair still pinned in the tight bun someone else had fashioned. Her arms, scarred and faded, peeked out as she reached for a pan that looked heavier than her wrists could bear. She moved without noise, out of habit, not stealth. Eli watched her from the barn window as she cracked 2 eggs and stirred them without seasoning, as if expecting someone to take the spoon from her hands before she could finish. May rose with a sigh and the sound of cracking joints. She pulled her hair back with twine and stepped outside, ignoring the cold. She found the axe and began chopping firewood, each strike clean, precise, deliberate. The sleeves of her borrowed shirt strained across her back, but she didn't stop. When Eli approached, she didn't look up. She only said, "This fence of yours leans like it's given up," and went on splitting logs until sweat glazed her brow. June remained inside, her dress from the night before folded neatly by the window. She wore a faded green blouse and a skirt 1 size too short, the hem brushing her calves like it remembered a different woman's legs. She was standing in front of a cracked mirror, brushing her hair methodically, every stroke the same length. Her cloudy left eye stared back at her, unflinching. Eli leaned against the doorframe and cleared his throat. June met his gaze through the mirror. "You ain't gotta do anything," he said. "Not unless you want to." Her voice was soft but firm. "Idle hands get gossiped about." He said nothing more. The house already felt different. It had once been a monument to absence. His wife's shawl still folded on the mantel, a child's wooden toy tucked under the bed. Now there was movement, quiet as it was. The kettle hissed, a broom whispered across the floor, and laughter, brief, sharp, came from the yard. May had broken the axe handle. "Damn it," she muttered, half grinning, then winced as a splinter jabbed her thumb. Lena rushed out with a cloth, but May waved her off. "I've bled worse over stew pots." Still she let the girl bind it. Lena's hands trembled slightly, but May didn't flinch. Behind them, Eli finished mending the fence boards 1 nail at a time, the hammer tapping like distant hoofbeats. By midday they had settled into a rhythm not unlike a truce. June cleaned the shelves, dusted the windows, and read from a tattered book in the afternoons. She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried weight. Lena baked flatbread in silence, humming tunelessly, lost in repetition. May dragged buckets of water from the well and patched roof tiles, stubborn in her usefulness. She worked like she was proving someone wrong. The townsfolk, however, were less quiet. By evening, Miss Tansy had arrived at the ranch. She brought no basket, no excuse. Just her wrinkled shawl and a look that had seen too many winters. "You know they're talking," she said to Eli, who stood on the porch oiling a lantern. "Calling you all kinds of fool. Saying you bought yourself 3 brides. 1 for each sin." Eli didn't look up. "Let him talk." Miss Tansy narrowed her eyes. "You got plans for them girls, Shepherd?" "I got space," he said simply. "They needed it." Tansy studied him for a long moment, then turned her gaze to the figures inside. "May's the strong one. Cracked a boy's jaw once back in Tennessee. Lena's not from here, some cook's daughter, I think. And June, she used to teach. Until some fool threw boiling oil in her face during a church brawl. Called her a witch for knowing Latin." Eli's jaw twitched. "And yet the town still points at them, not the men who did it." Tansy snorted. "You think the wind don't carry old sins just because they're quiet? You're either their savior, Eli, or their next mistake." He met her eyes. "I'm not either." That night, Lena placed bread and soup on the table. She didn't sit. May brought a chair from the porch and dropped into it with a grunt, nodding once. June waited until Eli took the first bite before she lifted her spoon. No one said grace. But there was a stillness in the room that felt like reverence. "Do you plan to marry any of us?" June asked suddenly. Eli paused mid-bite. "No." Lena looked down at her lap. "Good," June said. "We didn't come here to replace ghosts." "No," he agreed. "You came here to get away from men like Finch. That's enough." For a moment no one moved. Then May leaned back in her chair, tilted it on 2 legs and said, "Well, long as we know where the lines are, I suppose we'll all sleep easier." Outside the wind picked up. Eli stepped onto the porch again. May followed with a broken piece of fence wood and a carving knife. She sat on the steps and began to whittle without comment. You don't trust easy, Eli said. May snorted. You do. He looked toward the moon, pale and distant. Did once. She carved in silence. Then, you think you're savant us. But maybe you're just lonely. I am, he said. That don't mean I'm wrong. The moon shifted behind a cloud. The cold deepened. You know, May said, voice lower now, I grew up thinking I'd marry some blacksmith or farmer. Didn't count on being told I was too much. Too tall. Too loud. Too much woman for one man to manage. They meant it like an insult, but I held on to it like a badge. Eli turned to her. Maybe you weren't too much. Maybe they were too little. She looked at him then, full on, eyes catching the lantern light. Maybe. Inside, Lena watched from the window, face half lit, one hand resting against the glass like she was remembering something. June was reading again, aloud this time, to no one in particular. Her voice was soft, steady, full of rhythm. The book was worn, and the page she lingered on mentioned redemption. Later, Eli would sit alone by the fire, listening to the house breathe. He would not yet know their stories, not fully. But he could feel them unfolding like seeds warming in the earth. They weren't his brides. They weren't his burden. They were people. Shadows, yes, but not ones he feared. He remembered something his mother once said, long before her voice faded from memory. You don't need to fix the whole world, Eli. Just give someone a place to rest a while. And here, in a house that had once known only silence and sorrow, 3 women began to breathe again. Not because he saved them, but because he didn't try to own them. And that, in the end, made all the difference. The wind changed on the 3rd day. It came in low and dry from the canyon, brushing across the ranch like a stranger come to test the strength of doors and bones alike. The morning started as any other. Lena tending to the hens, May sharpening tools, June reading beside the window, tracing every word with her finger like she was relearning the rhythm of language. Eli watched them from a distance, careful not to press too close. But something had shifted. There was tension now, woven into the air like a thread pulling tight. That afternoon, Lena dropped a plate when she heard footsteps near the gate. Her hands flew to her chest as if to hold her ribs in place, her eyes wide and far away. The others ran in at the sound, but she shook her head before they could speak. It was nothing, she whispered. Just the wind. It wasn't. A man had come riding down the path, not a lawman, not a neighbor. Eli recognized him from the saloon. A thick-shouldered brute with a sneer that didn't move when he smiled. His name was Clay Bishop, a ranch hand who'd drunk too much the night of the auction and placed a mock bid on May. He hadn't been laughed out for it. He'd left on his own, red-faced and snarling. Now he stood at the edge of Eli's land, hand on his belt, waiting like the land owed him something. Eli stepped down from the porch. You're not welcome here. Clay spat in the dirt. Ain't here for you. You won't get past me. I got a claim, Clay said, voice oily. Paid for her fair and square. May stepped out then, barefoot, face streaked with dust and sweat. She stood beside Eli but didn't speak. Her hands were steady. Her gaze fixed. You got nothing, she said. You offered a bottle of rye and a joke. That ain't a claim. Clay smirked. You think you're too good for me now? I was always too good for you, she said, quiet as thunder. Clay shifted his stance as if readying for something, but Eli didn't move. Just stood, arms loose at his side, eyes steady. That's when Clay noticed the rifle resting against the porch post, uncocked, untouched, but present. You can ride off, Eli said, or you can limp off. But either way you're leaving. Clay laughed once, sharp and mean, then turned his horse. He didn't ride fast. Men like him never did. They wanted you to know they might come back. The silence that followed was thick. May didn't flinch. She walked back inside, poured a glass of water and sat at the table. Lena waited until nightfall to ask, what happens when the next man comes? No one answered. That night they all stayed closer to the fire. May sharpened the same knife over and over. June pretended to read but never turned the page. Lena kept glancing toward the door. Eli sat with his back to the window, watching the shadows move. Later, after the others had gone to bed, he found May sitting out by the barn. You did good today, he said. She shrugged. I didn't do nothing. You stood your ground. She looked up at the sky. It never ends, does it? The proving. The fending off. Even when you've done everything right. Eli didn't answer. Instead, he sat beside her, both of them facing the prairie as if waiting for it to offer something back. I've got nothing but this land, he said after a long silence. It's all I know. I plant things, fix things, keep things going. I don't know how to fix people. "You're not supposed to," she said. "Just don't break us more." He nodded slowly. That was all she wanted. No miracles, no mending, just no more hurt. By morning, June had decided to teach again. The neighbor's boy, Simon, had knocked with a sheepish grin and a book in his hand. "Pa says I can't read for beans, and Ma says you used to be real smart." June had blinked, stunned. But she invited him in and took the book, her hand trembling slightly. For the first time she didn't sit by the window. She sat at the table, her clouded eyes softened by sunlight. She didn't smile much, but that morning she did. Just once. Eli saw it. And Lena surprised them all. She asked to go into town. No one pushed her. But when she said it, she stood taller, like it mattered. "Just for sugar," she added quickly. Maybe flour." May offered to go with her. June said she'd write a list. Eli told them to be back before sundown. But Lena said, "I want to go alone." So she did. She wore a scarf and a gray shawl. She kept her hands in her sleeves. But she walked with purpose, and though her fingers shook when she handed the coin to the grocer, she looked him in the eye. People stared. They always did. Some whispered. Some crossed the street. Miss Tansy, sweeping her porch, simply nodded. Lena nodded back. She returned before the sky turned gold. Eli was mending tack in the barn. She walked straight to him and held out the sack of flour. He didn't say anything. Just took it and handed her a folded napkin. "What's this?" she asked. "Apple jam. You forgot it." She blinked, tears catching her lower lashes. "I didn't mean to cry," she said softly. "I know." The next few days passed without storm, but with a quiet change. Simon returned for lessons. May repaired the hinges on the pantry door without being asked. June began humming again. Lena planted seeds in the windowsill box. Basil, thyme, a few mystery sprouts she'd saved from old kitchens. The ranch began to resemble something like a home. Not perfect, not whole, but breathing. Then came the sheriff. He arrived one morning, boots thick with red dust, hat too clean for a man who claimed to know struggle. Eli met him at the gate. "Words come from Finch," the sheriff said. "Says there's some legal issue with your guests." "Finch sold what wasn't his," Eli replied. "Maybe," the sheriff allowed. "But the town's uneasy. Preacher says it ain't natural. 3 women, unmarried, living under one roof with a man who ain't kin." Eli crossed his arms. "They're free people." "That may be. But freedom makes folks nervous." The sheriff gave no threat, just a warning. Then he rode off, leaving a trail of suspicion behind him. That evening Eli told the women. May's jaw set. "They think we're his still." June nodded. Freedom's always looked like danger to small minds. Lena didn't speak. But later, when the wind picked up and the house settled into shadows, she sat beside Eli on the porch, cradling a blanket in her lap like it held all her memories. "I was never free," she said. "Not really. Kitchen to kitchen, hand to hand, always someone deciding what I was worth." He didn't look at her. Just stared out into the wind. "Do you feel free now?" he asked. She thought for a long time. "I don't know. But I feel seen." In the distance, coyotes cried. The wind carried their song across the plains like a hymn. Eli closed his eyes and let the sound pass through him. Inside, June was lighting the lamp. May stirred something thick and fragrant on the stove. And for one flicker of a moment, the world felt like it was tilting toward grace. Rain came hard that Sunday morning. It wasn't the kind of drizzle that whispered against rooftops. It pounded the windows like judgment. The kind of storm folks said God sent when he was watching close. Thunder rolled low across the plains, not angry, just steady, like a drumbeat before a reckoning. Inside the cabin, the fire had gone out. The air smelled of damp cotton and boiled beans, and June was wringing out Lena's dress by the hearth while May dried her boots near the stove. Eli hadn't spoken much since sunrise. He sat at the table sharpening his knife, the rasp of metal on stone the only voice in the room. Lena had stayed up late baking biscuits, something sweet for once. The kitchen still smelled faintly of clove and burnt sugar, though no one had eaten much. There had been a knock before dawn. Not urgent. Not loud. Just polite enough to carry menace. Sheriff Hammond stood outside with 2 others. His deputy and a man Eli didn't recognize, tall and thin with a mustache too neat for any honest work. Behind them waited a covered wagon, tarp flapping in the wind. "Got some paperwork," the sheriff said. "You ought to read it." Eli didn't take it. "What's the charge?" "No charge," the stranger chimed in. "Just a matter of clarification. Ownership dispute, technically speaking." Eli looked past him. "Finch sent you." "Finch filed a claim." Says these women were contractually bound to certain debts. He's willing to forgive him, the man added, voice syrupy, if they return voluntarily. We don't want trouble, Shepherd. Just resolution. May stepped into the doorway. We ain't contracts. We're people. The man tipped his hat but didn't meet her eyes. Doesn't change the records. You think a bottle of whiskey and a laugh count as legal tender? June asked from behind. The man blinked. We'll let the court decide that. Lena stayed inside, but she stood behind the window. Her hands twisted in her apron. Her breathing was shallow, fast. Eli stepped down into the mud. They're not going anywhere. The sheriff sighed. Eli, don't make this harder. Town's talking. Church folks say it's immoral. 3 women, unmarried, sharing a home with a widowed man. You know how that sounds. I know how it looks, Eli said, voice like gravel. Like decency. You're gonna stir up trouble. I didn't stir it. I sheltered it. The rain hit harder then, soaking through jackets, through hair, through hope. The sheriff muttered something Eli didn't catch, and the wagon turned without a word. They left the papers on the fence post, weighted with a stone. After they left, June read the documents in full. Her good eye skimmed fast, lips tight. They're trying to scare us. Legal nonsense stitched together with threats. May lit a match off the stove and held it to the edge of the papers. Let him send more. The flames curled the parchment slowly. June watched until the last ash fell. But fear doesn't burn as easy. That afternoon, whispers turned into words. Townsfolk passing through the ranch road slowed their wagons. A boy threw a stone and ran. Someone painted the word shame on the water barrel with pig's blood. Lena found it first. She scrubbed until her knuckles bled. Miss Tansy arrived after sundown, soaked and out of breath. They're calling a council, she said, voice shaking. Church elders, shopkeepers, all of them. They're meeting in the chapel tomorrow night. Gonna decide whether you ought to stay. Whether they ought to. June didn't flinch. Let them. May looked at Eli. If we leave now, we can outrun the worst of it. Eli shook his head. You don't run from a fire you didn't start. Lena sat at the kitchen table, eyes wide, silent. That night, Eli walked the fence line with a lantern. Rain had stopped, but the wind lingered. He saw it then, a figure near the tree line. Watching. A shape that slipped away before he could call out. He didn't chase. Just stood there, heart slow, hand steady. They were testing him. Testing them. The following evening, the chapel filled before the bell even rang. Eli arrived late, hat in hand, boots muddy but back straight. He walked in alone. The room fell silent. At the front stood Pastor Vaughn, gray-bearded, sunken-eyed, voice like dry leaves. The sheriff sat near him. Finch wasn't there, but his men were. Store owners, wives with pursed lips, boys with stones in their pockets. You're here to defend your conduct, Mr. Shepherd, the pastor began. 3 women, no ceremony, no kinship, living under your roof. The Lord frowns on impropriety. Is kindness now improper? Eli asked. There are rules. There are people, he said. You all watch them get sold like meat. Not one of you stopped it. I did. A murmur rose. Someone scoffed. Someone said, sin. Eli raised his voice then, not loud but clear. I never touched them. Never claimed them. Just gave them room to heal. That's more than this town ever gave. June stepped through the doorway then, her voice ringing across the pews. You talk about sin but turn your eyes from cruelty. You call us fallen, but we're the ones who crawled out. May followed. We built that ranch with work and silence. No man laid a hand on us. We're not your scandal. We're your shame. Then Lena, trembling, entered last. She didn't speak. She just held out her hands, red, cracked, raw from scrubbing. This is what we do, Eli said. When no one else does it, we survive. Pastor Vaughn faltered. A few heads turned. Miss Tansy rose in the back row and spoke for the first time. I remember when none of you would sit near me, 'cause my boy was born too dark. I remember what silence cost me. Eli gave these girls what y'all never could, peace. Someone tried to argue, but the words caught in their throat. After a long pause, the pastor folded his paper. There will be no formal judgment. But don't expect welcome. Eli nodded once. We never asked for it. He walked out. The women followed. No one clapped. No one spat. Just silence. A different kind this time. Back at the ranch, the lamps were already lit. May opened the door. June set the kettle on. Lena swept the floor as if nothing had changed. But something had. Not everything needed to be declared out loud to be understood. That night they sat on the porch together. No words. Just breath and wind and the steady creak of the swing. The storm had passed, but the air still held the scent of thunder. June spoke once just before bed. "They saw us." Eli nodded. "They did. And they didn't blink." "Good," May said. "Let their eyes sting for once." And Lena, already halfway asleep in her chair, whispered, "We didn't come here to be loved. Just to be left in peace." They hadn't been welcomed. But they had not been run out either. Sometimes in a town like that, it was enough to stay. The wind came back not with a roar, but with a whisper, curling around the porch posts and eaves like a memory revisiting its home. It moved softly now, almost reverently, as if it, too, had been watching the little ranch with the same wary hope that hung between the rafters. Spring had crept in while no one was looking. The snow had melted weeks ago, but it was only now the land had begun to believe it. The earth outside the cabin was soft beneath Eli's boots. The fence line stood straighter these days. The porch didn't creak quite so sadly. The basil Lena planted had sprouted green, reaching for sun with the same kind of quiet defiance she carried in her shoulders now. May had built a new pantry shelf, perfectly leveled, no nails left over. June had cleared out the broken piano keys and hung an oil lamp above the hearth, where she read to Simon twice a week, her voice steady and warm. They had not been run out. They had not been embraced either. But they remained. And sometimes, survival is the most profound rebellion. Eli had taken to rising early again, not because the work demanded it, but because he wanted to see the morning begin. He liked the way the light caught on Lena's dress when she walked across the yard, the way May sang now when she thought no one could hear, and the way June sipped her coffee with one hand on her hip like a woman who'd chosen every inch of her own life. He did not speak of love. Not aloud. But it crept in between gestures, coiled in the simple acts. A coat draped over shoulders before the night chill set in, a shelf built without request, tea left steeping just the way June liked it, strong with honey. These things said more than declarations ever could. They were the language of people who had lost too much to gamble with words. Then, just when they'd begun to believe the worst had passed, Finch returned. It happened fast. A scream from the barn. A flash of orange against the night sky. May burst through the front door, shouting, "He's here." Eli didn't ask who. He already knew. The barn was alight. Not fully engulfed, not yet, but flame licked the lower beams, hungry and spreading. Smoke poured upward like it had something to say. Finch stood near the fence, torch still in hand, his face twisted with fury and drink and whatever rot grew in men who lost power and couldn't bear it. "You stole them," he shouted over the fire's crackle. "Paraded them like saints while the whole town laughed at me." Lena clutched the porch post, trembling. June stepped forward. "Put it out," she said to Eli. "I'll keep her safe." But May was already running, bucket in hand, hair whipping behind her like a banner. Eli followed, hauling water from the trough. They worked without speaking, sweat mixing with smoke, steam rising in clouds as they beat back the blaze. Twice, the flames roared high enough to blind them. Once, May slipped and gashed her knee open on a broken rake. She didn't stop. Inside the house, June held Lena close, pressing a wet cloth to her mouth to block the smoke that snuck in beneath the door. Lena whispered over and over, "Don't let him take us back." "He won't," June said steady. "Not while I breathe." When the last of the fire hissed into wet ash, Eli turned to find Finch gone. But he hadn't vanished. The man had circled behind the house. June saw it first. The glint of a blade. The crazed eyes. The sharp, shaking breath of a man who'd convinced himself this was justice. He lunged toward Lena. And Eli was faster. He tackled Finch into the dirt, years of grief and grit and restraint pouring out in every blow. The rage wasn't for this moment alone. It was for Anna, his wife, who had died without dignity. For every girl who had no place but a back room or a bargain. For every night this land swallowed sorrow without answer. Finch bled. Not fatally. Just enough to remember he was flesh and fallible. Sheriff Hammond arrived an hour later. Someone had seen the fire from town. No one asked questions this time. The sheriff took one look at Finch, tied and gagged in the wagon bed, and said, "We'll be taking him far from here." No charges were filed against Eli. No sermons followed. Perhaps the town had finally learned to let silence rest in the right direction. The barn took damage, but it didn't fall. May rebuilt the doors by the next week. June taught Simon and two others how to read by lamplight. Lena began sketching with charcoal on flour sacks, soft portraits of hands and wildflowers. The ranch lived. And in time so did they. Not as property. Not as pity. But as people. On the first truly warm morning of the season, Lena stepped onto the porch in a clean cotton dress and whispered to no one in particular, I don't flinch when I hear boots anymore. May answered from the yard, grinning. That's 'cause yours are louder now. And June, setting down her coffee, said, some scars stay. But they don't get the last word. Eli didn't say much. He just watched the way they moved through the space as if it were theirs. Because it was. Whether they stayed a year or forever didn't matter. He had not rescued them. He had simply made room. That evening, as the sun folded itself into the western ridge, the four of them sat on the porch. No one rushed to speak. They just breathed, each one knowing that the worst had already come and passed, and still, they remained. The wind returned, gentle now. Not a storm. Not a warning. Just a witness. And I tell you now, if you ever ride past that stretch of prairie and see a porch lit with oil lamps and women laughing over fresh bread, tip your hat and keep riding. Not because you're unwelcome, but because peace doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it just lives quietly in the places where grace was once made room to grow. That ranch will never be marked on maps. But the wind remembers. The wind always does.